Hi, welcome back. We tend to think that zoo attacks only happen when someone breaks the rules, but as you'll see today, sometimes it's the people following those rules who end up paying the highest price. From a graduate student who grew too comfortable with her own safety protocols to an 11-year veteran betrayed by the very warning system he was trained to trust. Let's start in Bozeman, Montana, where a behind-the-scenes visit turned into the worst day a family could have imagined. It was October 17th, 2018, at a wildlife park just outside Bozeman, Montana. That morning, Bozeman had experienced a hard freeze that had left the service roads slick, and ice had built up around several outdoor gate tracks. Staff arrived before sunrise, expecting an ordinary day. However, within a few hours, the park would become the scene of its worst emergency in years. Davin Orick was 36, a middle school science teacher from Spokane. He was spending fall break with his wife and their 10-year-old daughter. He wasn't the type to chase danger or ignore rules. In fact, he volunteered at a local wildlife rehabilitation center. He had booked the behind-the-scenes tour months earlier because he wanted his daughter to understand that even animals raised around people are still wild. Honestly, that's what makes this case so difficult to think about. The lion, Coda, had been rescued several years earlier after authorities shut down an illegal roadside attraction. He had adjusted well to professional care, but remained highly food motivated and occasionally became agitated whenever his normal transfer routine was interrupted. Keepers had documented increased pacing and repeated pushing against shift gates during unexpected delays. None of those behaviors were considered unusual enough to suspend routine protected contact management, but they showed he was less predictable whenever his schedule changed. That cold morning, ice collected along the lower guide rail of the hydraulic transfer gate. While staff shifted Coda between holding areas, the gate encountered resistance before completing its travel. The control panel displayed a fault condition, and keepers stopped to inspect the mechanism. Several employees suggested moving the tour group back into the education building until the problem was resolved, but supervisors believed Coda remained fully contained behind the partially closed transfer gate. Looking back, that's probably the decision investigators replayed more than any other. Keeping the guests where they were seemed reasonable at the time. It turned out to be the final safety layer before disaster. While maintenance staff worked from the protected service side, Coda leaned repeatedly against the partially seated gate. Investigators later determined the locking bolts had never fully engaged because the gate stopped just short of its final position, under the lion's weight. The barrier shifted enough to create an opening into the adjacent service corridor. Startled by the unfamiliar space, Coda immediately moved away from the keepers and toward the nearest open access route. Witnesses described hearing staff yell for an emergency lockdown as radios crackled throughout the building. At nearly the same moment, investigators found that a service access door leading toward the education corridor had been left unsecured after equipment deliveries earlier that morning. Instead of remaining inside the restricted keeper area, Coda entered the public side corridor where the tour group had been waiting. Davin reacted instantly. He pulled his daughter and another nearby child behind him while staff rushed to move visitors toward an emergency exit. I don't think anyone can fault what he did. He wasn't trying to stop the lion, he was simply buying a few seconds for two children to get away. The encounter lasted less than 2 minutes before keepers successfully recalled Coda toward the holding building using emergency recall procedures and secured him behind multiple shift gates. By then, Davin had suffered catastrophic injuries. Paramedics arrived approximately 9 minutes after the first emergency call, but despite immediate treatment, he could not be revived. The county coroner determined that Davin died from severe crushing injuries and blood loss consistent with a large fellat attack. Investigators concluded that no single mistake caused the tragedy. Instead, they identified a chain of failures: ice interfering with the transfer gate, an incomplete mechanical lock, an unsecured service access door, and the decision to leave tour guests in place while staff resolved what appeared to be a routine equipment problem. That's the part that really stays with me. None of those problems seemed catastrophic on their own. Together, they became exactly that. After the investigation, the park permanently ended all behind-the-scenes predator tours. New procedures required every guest area to be completely cleared before any large carnivore transfer, regardless of whether an animal was believed to be securely contained. Davin's death exposed how several small failures can quietly line up until an animal ends up exactly where it was never supposed to be. But the next case is even harder to process, because the danger never escaped its enclosure. Instead, a researcher walked straight into it, convinced every safety check had already been done. It was July 12, 2017, at a wildlife park just outside Tucson. You know, these kinds of stories usually happen because of a long chain of mistakes, but this one started with a single dangerous assumption on a day that was already chaotic. It's one thing to have a plan, but watching that plan unravel in real time is honestly terrifying. Petra Noelle Vey was 27, a brilliant graduate student focused on animal behavior. She was the kind of person who double-checked everything she lived for data. She'd spent 18 months working on a special enrichment ball for Ivo, a 230-pound male jaguar. This wasn't just a toy. It had cameras and sensors sent cartridges inside. But Ivo was a jaguar. These guys are basically muscle and instinct. He started treating that toy like a kill, guarding it like it was his prize. The senior keeper saw the red flags and made it crystal clear. Nobody touches that ball unless the cat is locked away, the gates are verified, and a second person confirms the den is empty. It's a standard safety rule, but as we know, rules only work if you follow them every single time. It's almost impossible to accept that such a sharp, cautious mind could let that kind of protocol slide even for a second. The morning of the attack, everything went sideways. A lion in another wing had a medical emergency, and the entire team was pulled away to deal with that. Radio traffic was a mess, routines were scrapped, and Petra's retrieval was put on hold. When the chaos started, one of the keepers moved Ivo into the yard, but, and this is the part that haunts me, he never finished the gate check. The service door was left unlocked. Petra saw Ivo out in the yard. She saw the red warning tag on the door. She even checked her tablet, saw the camera battery was dying, and got impatient. She radioed, got no answer, and decided to just go in. It's honestly gut-wrenching to think about. She slipped into the den, reaching for the ball with a pole, thinking she had a window of time. But Ivo had figured out how to push through the gate that hadn't latched properly. He didn't even make a sound. His claws just clicked on the concrete right behind her. The silence in those few seconds before the attack is really what stays with me. It's just chilling. The security footage is devastating. He hit her from behind and it was over in seconds. She tried to scramble for the door, but he was just too fast and too powerful. A maintenance worker heard her scream and hit the alarm, but by the time the team managed to lure Ivo into another pen, which took about 6 minutes, it was already too late. Paramedics got to her 11 minutes after the alarm, but she didn't have a pulse. In the end, the investigators found that no one person was to blame. It was just a perfect storm of an emergency, a forgotten lock, and a researcher who let the pressure of a deadline override her safety training. They didn't put Ivo down. They just moved him to a facility with stricter, no-touch protocols. Petra's advisor actually finished her thesis using the data she'd collected. The final chapter is basically a warning about how easy it is to lose sight of reality when you're chasing a degree. Petra's death proved that even the best designed safety systems can fall apart when routine, pressure, and human assumptions stop lining up. But at Northgate Zoological Park near Brno, an experienced keeper trying to help a rescued tiger would discover that compassion can become just as dangerous as complacency. It was May 12, 2020, at the regional zoo near Brno in the Czech Republic. By mid-afternoon, what was supposed to be a quiet donor presentation had turned into one of the worst incidents the zoo had ever experienced. Honestly, this case sticks with me because nobody walked into work expecting to take a dangerous shortcut. The tragedy came from several decisions that all seemed reasonable at the time. Anton Valsaris was 38 years old. He had spent 14 years caring for hoofed animals before accepting a promotion into carnivore management the previous year. He wasn't known for taking risks. If anything, coworkers joked that Anton could turn a simple checklist into a science project because he documented everything. The promotion meant better insurance and steadier hours, something that mattered because his 7-year-old daughter was being treated for a congenital heart condition. Some veteran carnivore keepers quietly questioned whether someone without decades of big cat experience was ready for the position. Anton believed good animal care came from patience, observation, and consistency rather than bravado. When the zoo accepted Ronnie, a Bengal tiger confiscated from a roadside attraction, he became one of the strongest advocates for creating a rehabilitation program for rescued predators. Behind the public habitat, the service building smelled of damp concrete, fresh straw, disinfectant, and thawing meat waiting for afternoon feeding. A full-grown Bengal tigress can weigh more than 300 pounds and cross an indoor holding room before most people have time to react. That's why accredited zoos rely on protected contact management, where multiple barriers, locking systems, and independent safety checks separate people from dangerous animals at all times. And that's really the point. Those barriers exist because even a frightened tiger doesn't stop being a tiger. Within Ronnie's first few weeks, junior keeper Nessa Oren documented several unusual stress responses. Sharp metallic noises caused the tiger to flatten herself against walls or retreat into corners. Whenever long handling poles appeared near the mesh, she sometimes lunged at the barrier before backing away again. Nessa recommended postponing the donor presentation until Ronnie became more predictable. Anton reviewed the transfer records provided by the confiscating agency. According to the available husbandry documents, Ronnie routinely completed protected shifts between holding areas and responded normally to standard keeper cues. He concluded the behavior was probably temporary stress from transport and a new environment rather than evidence that routine protected contact procedures had become unsafe. The presentation began shortly after 2 o'clock, with donors standing safely behind a secondary viewing barrier. Anton explained how rescued tigers were managed through protected contact, while Ronnie remained inside the transfer area between the exhibit yard and holding building. Even from behind the glass, Nessa noticed Ronnie's ears pinning back each time equipment scraped across the concrete floor. Then, a volunteer accidentally dropped a large stainless steel catering tray. The crash echoed through the service building, building. Ronnie immediately bolted into the narrow transfer race connecting the yard and indoor holding den, where she remained standing instead of completing the normal shift inside. Nessa suggested ending the presentation immediately and clearing the building. Anton hesitated, and honestly, I can understand why. Moving dozens of guests through nearby service doors while Ronnie was already panicked would mean more voices, more slamming doors, and even more unfamiliar movement. He believed quietly encouraging her into the holding den first would actually reduce her stress before everyone left. From the protected contact vestibule, Anton picked up a plywood sorting shield, a standard husbandry tool used to influence an animal's movement without direct contact. As he positioned it near the sliding gate, one corner struck the steel frame with a sharp metallic crack. Ronnie charged. Investigators later determined that the sliding gate's locking pin had failed to fully engage because the worn guide assembly allowed the barrier to stop just short of its locking position. When Ronnie slammed into the gate, it forced the partially seated lock open, creating enough space for the barrier to slide free. The hallway security camera recorded Anton stepping backward only after the gate suddenly shifted. He tried to bring the plywood shield between himself and the tiger while reaching for the emergency exit, but Ronnie crossed the distance almost instantly and knocked him to the floor before he reached the door. The camera could not see the entire holding room, but investigators later synchronized the footage with radio traffic, alarm logs, and witness statements. Nessa activated the emergency alarm within seconds while other keepers rushed toward the protected contact controls. They used compressed fire extinguishers and recall procedures to drive Ronnie back into the transfer race before securing multiple gates behind her. The entire response took just under 2 minutes. Staff reached Anton almost immediately after the area was secured. Paramedics arrived approximately 11 minutes after the initial alarm, but his injuries were too severe for resuscitation. The investigation later uncovered records from the roadside attraction that had never been included with Ronnie's transfer paperwork. Enforcement files contained witness statements describing employees repeatedly striking cage bars with steel poles during paid photography sessions to force the tiger into position. Investigators also found measurable wear in the gate's guide assembly during post-incident testing, even though the mechanism had passed earlier routine inspections. In the end, investigators concluded that no single mistake caused Anton's death. It was the combination of incomplete behavioral history, a worn locking system, and a compassionate decision made under pressure by someone who genuinely believed he was reducing stress for both the animal and the guests. After the investigation, staff found one sentence highlighted in Anton's presentation notes. Rescue doesn't begin when an animal leaves a cage. It begins when we understand what happened inside it. For me, that's probably the hardest part of this story. Anton never stopped believing that rescued animals deserved a second chance. The tragedy was that nobody fully understood what Ronnie had survived before she ever arrived at the zoo. Anton believed rescued predators deserved a second chance. Tragically, incomplete records and one worn mechanical part made that decision fatal. But the next case shows that even when every procedure appears to work exactly as intended, one hidden mechanical failure can still leave a keeper completely unprotected. It was December 27, 2015, at the local zoo in British Columbia. The holiday crowds were already filling the public walkways, and what gets me about this case is that nobody outside the keeper corridors had any idea how close the zoo already was to disaster. Looking back, investigators wouldn't point to one reckless decision. Instead, they found years of small, quiet compromises that had just become part of the daily grind. Alara Wynne Mosley was 26, and she'd been working at the zoo for just over 14 months. She started in the marine mammal section before moving over to the northern carnivore program. People who worked with her said she was meticulous, the kind of person who checked every latch twice and never ever skipped a step. Even so, some of the veteran staff privately felt she'd moved into the polar bear section a little faster than most new keepers. She really wanted to prove she belonged there. Alara regularly picked up extra shifts because she was gunning for a permanent position in the department. 2 months earlier, management had told her they wanted to see her handle the morning routine during the busy holiday season before they made the promotion official. The promotion meant better pay and more stability, so she took every single opportunity she could get. The polar bear complex ran under what they call protected contact procedures, but that's just a fancy way of saying keepers and bears are never, ever supposed to occupy the same space. The enclosure had hydraulic slide gates, mechanical locking bolts, inspection windows, and a control panel that confirmed whether each gate had fully reached its closed position. Much of the system had been installed years earlier, and while it still met the zoo's operating standards, it lacked some of the newer independent lock monitoring features found in more modern carnivore facilities. And honestly, they have to. Adult male polar bears can weigh well over 1,000 pounds, sprint nearly 25 miles per hour, and generate enough force to crush anything with one swipe. So, once those safety barriers fail, you don't get a second chance. The problems, though, had started long before that morning. The senior keeper, who was supposed to be working with Alara, called in sick the night before, which left one supervisor scrambling to cover 2 different carnivore sections. Official policy said you needed 2 qualified people to double-check every transfer before anyone stepped inside. But investigators later found that when the zoo was short-staffed, that second check had just become informal. It wasn't ever written down as a new rule, but it had quietly become the way things were done whenever the schedule got tight. Later that night, another keeper noticed Nanu, the adult male polar bear, favoring his left front paw after he came back in from the habitat. The injury looked minor, so the keeper left a non-urgent voicemail for the vet team, but never put it into the official electronic log. By the next morning, that vet was already tied up with another animal emergency across the zoo, so the message went unseen. When Alara started her shift, everything looked normal on paper. She gave Nanook his cue, and he walked into the race leading to the habitat, disappearing around a concrete blind corner. From the window, Alara could only see his back end before he vanished. Thinking he'd made it through, she hit the button to close the hydraulic gate. The gate reached the end of its track, and the panel lit up, telling her it was closed. But what investigators found later was much worse. The sensor correctly detected that the gate had reached the fully closed position. But what they did not know is because the control system was old, it didn't independently verify whether the mechanical locking bolt had fully engaged. Years of wear had left the bolt sticking intermittently, and that morning, it stopped just short of locking. From the control panel, everything appeared normal, even though the barrier wasn't actually secured. Alara did consider asking for someone else to verify the transfer, but the only other qualified person nearby was already busy covering another section during one of the zoo's busiest days of the year. If she waited, she'd fall behind on her tasks and the public programs. And I think this is probably the hardest part of the story because, from her perspective, every safety check she could reasonably perform appeared to confirm that the enclosure was secure. She stepped into the holding area with her gear. As she rinsed the floor, Nanook shifted his weight to favor his sore paw, pressing against the gate. Because that faulty bolt hadn't engaged, the pressure forced the gate just enough to slip off its track. Once it shifted, the hydraulics failed, leaving the gate free for Nanook to push his way through. The hallway cameras caught her turning around when she heard the gate move, just seconds before the alarm went off. The attack itself was mostly out of view, but investigators were able to sync the hallway audio and the alarm records to piece together exactly what happened. The staff followed the emergency plan immediately, but they were forced to follow protocol. They had to shift Nanook into a separate area and double-check every single barrier before they could even get to her. The team secured the bear and got the paramedics in as fast as they could, but Alara had suffered massive crushing injuries. She didn't make it. The investigation proved that no single mistake caused this. It was a perfect, terrible storm. Chronic staffing issues, the slow abandonment of the 2-person check system, missing communication about the bear's injury, an aging gate system that verified gate position but not locking bolt engagement, and a mechanical failure that didn't show up on the console. Each one of those things might have been manageable alone. Together, they were fatal. They later found Alara's promotion paperwork sitting in the office, still waiting for a signature. After this, the zoo completely overhauled its procedures. Mandatory 2-person sign-offs, more frequent inspections of the older gate hardware, retrofitting the control system with independent lock status sensors, and new requirements to physically confirm the locking bolts, not just rely on the control panel. Alara's death showed how dangerous it can be to trust a green indicator more than the machinery behind it. But the next case is different, because the victim wasn't a keeper at all. It was a security supervisor responding to what sounded like nothing more than a maintenance problem in the middle of the night. It was November 7th, 2022, at a zoological park in Duluth, Minnesota. It was the kind of night where the lake effect snow just kept piling up, leaving the elephant barn sitting dark and quiet under a fresh blanket of white. Or at least it should have been quiet. Instead, 3 heavy metallic booms echoed through the building loud enough that they carried all the way across the service yard. To Jovan Ellis Mirek, those weren't just random sounds. Jovan was 51, a guy who'd spent 2 decades working in management, the type who fixed problems by getting his hands dirty and checking things himself rather than just assuming someone else had it handled. Years earlier, he'd actually saved a coworker after investigating some weird banging behind a storage rack that everyone else had just ignored as loose equipment. The elephant barn was built for protected contact, which is just industry speak for keeping a solid barrier between people and animals that weigh over 5 tons. The security officers there weren't trained to work with the elephants. Their job was just to check the secure service vestibule if there was a concern about structural damage. They were never supposed to actually enter an animal space, just make sure the building was secure until the morning crew arrived. Around 12:40 in the morning, those 3 impacts happened again, followed by a long, grinding scrape that you could feel through the exterior wall. Jovan radioed dispatch, but he didn't get an answer because the dispatcher was busy helping a contractor get in through the main gate. He tried the keeper channel, but all he got was static. He hung out outside for nearly 2 minutes, just listening. Then another massive thud shook the service door, rattling rattling the frame. Thinking maybe the building itself was coming apart, Jovan used his keycard to step into the vestibule at 12:44. He announced himself, sweeping his light around, and honestly, everything looked perfectly fine. What Jovan couldn't see was that Mosey, a 36-year-old bull African elephant, had been messing with the internal gate, repeatedly hitting it with his tusks. Maintenance had actually flagged the gate for excessive wear just the week before because the locking mechanism was acting up. They'd ordered parts, but since the parts hadn't arrived, they just kept the gate in service with some temporary, unofficial workarounds. From where Jovan was standing, the gate looked closed. When Mosey heard the footsteps and saw the beam of the flashlight, he walked up to the barrier. As he leaned into it, that worn-out locking mechanism just gave up. The gate drifted open a few inches, and the elephant easily pushed it the rest of the way. And honestly, that's the terrifying part. Jovan wasn't standing inside an elephant enclosure. From everything he could actually see, he was standing in a protected service corridor. The security footage shows Jovan backing up toward the exit as Mosey stepped through. The hallway was narrow with concrete walls on both sides. There was nowhere for him to go. He tried to make it to the door, but Mosey was faster. His flashlight hit the floor, and the camera just caught the light spinning on the concrete, while the rest of the story had to be pieced together from logs and recordings later on. When the dispatcher got back to her console less than a minute later, she heard the commotion and sounded the alarm. The keepers arrived quickly, using food rewards and remote gates to get Mosey back behind a secure barrier. But by the time paramedics reached Jovan, it was too late. The investigation at first looked like it might blame Jovan for entering the building, but the records told a different story. He had followed the security protocol exactly. He checked the vestibule just like he was supposed to. The failure happened long before he ever swiped his card. Investigators concluded it wasn't one catastrophic mistake, but a chain of failures. A worn hydraulic part, outdated inspection procedures, an overwhelmed dispatcher, and no animal staff nearby. Almost everyone involved believed the system was working exactly as intended. Mosey wasn't euthanized. Instead, the zoo upgraded its gate lock verification system and changed overnight procedures so security officers no longer entered animal buildings alone. Jovan followed every procedure exactly as trained, but the final case is even more frustrating. An experienced bear keeper died because a simple scheduling change quietly altered an animal's behavior. It was March 14, 2018, at the local zoo in western Colorado. Looking back, it's hard to point to one single mistake, because honestly, there wasn't one. What happened was a quiet, deadly alignment of small problems that lined up perfectly until an experienced keeper walked into a space he truly believed was safe. Lorne Emil Kest was 42, and he'd been working with bears for 11 years. The guy was a pro. He started in hoofstock before moving into carnivores, and he had a reputation for being incredibly precise, not rigid, just careful. Newer keepers watched him like a hawk because he checked every latch twice and wouldn't even think about entering a holding area until he was certain every barrier was secure. He wasn't a reckless guy, which is exactly why the people who knew him still struggle to understand how this happened. It's always the ones who care the most about the details that you worry about, because when they finally let their guard down, it's because they've been lulled into a false sense of security by the system itself. Outside the zoo, Lorne's whole world was his mother, Mara. She was recovering from a stroke, so he worked permanent early shifts to finish by noon so he could get her to rehab. Management loved him because he was dependable, but that arrangement came with the pressure of finishing the entire bear section before the next crew arrived. The bear house was nothing fancy, just damp concrete, heavy steel slide gates, and long service corridors where every cartwheel or gate motor echoed through the building. Then there was Ada, a 700-pound brown bear. She was strong enough to bend steel if she slammed into it. For years, she'd been fed before 7 o'clock. But after the zoo brought in new scheduling software, her breakfast moved from 6:45 to 8:30. By the time the keepers were supposed to clean her den at 7:20, she was hungry and agitated, pawing at the feed door and guarding empty trays. The trouble started with that software rollout. The feeding schedule changed, but the printed husbandry sheets stayed the same. They still told keepers to clean Ada's den right after 7:20. Lorne flagged the conflict twice, but management just told him the rollout was happening in stages and to keep following the old paperwork. Earlier that month, Lorne had actually been written up for unauthorized overtime because he'd waited 43 minutes for Ada to voluntarily move rather than rushing her. So that Wednesday morning, he was feeling the squeeze. He arrived before sunrise, finished the smaller stalls, and started Ada's transfer at 7:24. A camera in the hallway later helped investigators piece it together. Ada entered the transfer race but stopped just behind a blind corner where a few meat scraps were lying near the gate. Lorne couldn't see her from the control panel. He hit the button to slide the gate shut, but it hit Ada's paw and popped back open a few inches. The light on the panel turned from green to amber, and this is where the situation becomes infuriating. Under the old system, amber meant the gate was locked but maybe needed a sensor tweak. After the upgrade, amber meant the lock had failed. Staff got an email about it and an online briefing, but nobody actually did any hands-on training with the new interface. Lorne checked the operating handle himself. It felt solid because the motor had jammed under the weight of the gate, even though it wasn't fully closed. From where he stood, the gap was hidden behind a wall. Honestly, I can understand why he trusted it. Every physical check he was taught to perform told him he was safe. It's a chilling reminder of how easily our own intuition can be used against us. Calling maintenance would have meant a delay, another overtime strike, and likely missing his mother's appointment. Trusting his experience and the solid feeling handle, Lauren stepped into the holding area at 7:27 with his hose and squeegee. As soon as that water hit the concrete, Ada backed up and pushed against the gate. It slid open. She crossed the room in 2 strides. The camera couldn't see inside, but the audio tells the story. Lauren turned, dropped the hose, and a split second later, the radio hit the floor. A younger keeper, Nessa, saw what was happening through a window and hit the emergency alarm at 7:28. The team arrived fast, using air and food to pull Ada back, but it was too late. Paramedics got to Lauren 11 minutes after the alarm, but there was nothing they could do. Investigators later concluded that no single person caused this. It was a chain of failures. The hunger-induced behavior, the conflicting schedules, the poor training, and the pressure to not go over his hours.